pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll go on to the roll call.
Andy Mary,
Yes.
Jim Balzer,
Here.
Mike Boldig,
Here.
Noel Deep, Wayne Gagnon,
Here.
Jeannie Long, Mary Neufeld, here. Danny Pyatt, JD Schrader,
Okay. And so is there public comment?
Kevin McKenna.
Okay, Kevin, if you'd like to, why don't you come up here so we can hear a little better?
Okay.
You get 5 minutes, and for the record, state your name before you start.
Hi, my name's Kevin McKenna, and the reason that I'm here is twofold. First is to ask for a closed session meeting with the board on a personnel issue. And secondly, just to state that the period of time that this has been going on is too long. It started in the middle to end of February, and we're still progressing at this point. If we could get things to move quicker in the future, that would be positive. And that's all.
Okay. And we will go on to the COVID update.
Okay, hot off the press from Darlene today, we have a total of 17 temporary remote learners, 1 at East, 3 at North, 4 at West, 3 at the middle school, and 6 at the high school. And in addition to that report, our board-approved medical liaison, Dr. McKenna, is here to provide additional updated COVID information.
Well, hello, everyone. I thought, based upon just the year that's gone by, that it'd be good to have kind of a brief, general, sort of broad update about COVID-19. You know, it's really hard to really comprehend just where we've gone or come almost in a year. So just wanted to run through some things briefly, kind of summarize a little bit, and then talk about, in general, like from a medical and from a district standpoint, thinking about next steps as well. So COVID-19, so we'll begin with just a brief review of the pandemic. I think a synopsis of what we know now, what we understand about the pandemic itself, the virus itself, our current school year strategy. I thought that would be helpful just to do a quick review as well of how we came to the decisions we did about our strategies to mitigate risk during the pandemic. And then briefly touch on thoughts on planning for the coming school year in 21-22. I should say, if anyone has questions at all during the talk, please feel free to interrupt or to ask. So just quick review here, bit of a timeline. Back in December, there were reports of the viral pneumonia, and then cases presented steadily and then quickly here in the U.S. with the lockdown in March and then progressing through. From a district standpoint, we began conversation in May, June, and progressed through, and that was a broad group of people, including the health department, myself as medical advisor, district administration, teachers, staff, to try to discuss a plan for potentially opening the school in the fall, which was not an absolute guarantee from an in-person standpoint at that time. So, you know, I think we noted, particularly in this part of this country, cases and deaths really began to rise here late September, October, probably cresting around end of October, maybe sometime in November, with cases persisting into December. And then since December, we've seen a general decline in number of cases. Though, interestingly, we're in somewhat of a race. The vaccines were authorized in December and around that time, we were beginning to recognize new variants coming on board. And then certainly present day, also partly why to discuss this as well is within the state, there's been a repeal of the mask mandate at this point as well, in a broad sense. But local institutions have options to decide what they wish to do. So I think this is a really helpful map. It is from January 1st of 2017 to January 1st of 2021. And what this is the weekly number of deaths from all causes in the United States. This graph is from the CDC. So I want to show this. If you look here, these are the deaths here. And this is the upper bound threshold for excess deaths. So what we see is a very typical sort of trend line here. This is in January of 2018. You see this peak here. These X's or crosses mark excess deaths in that year. And you see generally 2019 was unremarkable until we get to end of 2019 and heading into January of 2020. This is in roughly March, April, we see excess deaths really increase. This is just to underscore the significant loss of life that is an aberration in the country. And this is, and you can see these emerging, and interestingly, you actually see this drop here, heading past January 2021. I think of note, we think of coronavirus as a condition that affects primarily older individuals, but when we look at excess deaths, we actually see at least 2 out of 3 of the excess deaths from COVID-19, the number of excess deaths were based on COVID-19 for individuals aged 25 to 44 in particular. So you see that age group, excess deaths were primarily attributed to COVID. What we know now, so we've learned quite a bit about the virus over the past year. So, initially when the pandemic began, we weren't wearing masks, and now we all clearly are. Coronavirus is spread through droplets and airborne. So those are the 2 main routes. We know based upon reviews of information, data, and some other studies that we have that masks do reduce infections. If you get very close to universal mask wearing, you get about a 70% risk reduction. You see that distancing in general can reduce infection risk. Outdoor activity is an avenue of safer activity than indoor. Most super spreading events occurred in indoor events, not outdoor. And then I think very importantly, we learned that in-person school can safely occur with the appropriate mitigation. Recently, we have learned quite a bit about the vaccine. So I'll make one caveat, but the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are very effective against coronavirus, and they are quite safe. They are, in terms of serious illness and death, they're as close to perfect as something can get. They're like 99.99% effective against severe illness and death. They're also quite good at preventing or limiting illness, including some body of evidence building now that they can reduce the risk of asymptomatic transmission. I will make one caveat. There's some concern about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Looking at the data, preliminary data does suggest that it probably is safe, but it's important to look at that information to make an appropriate assessment. So I think holding on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a very appropriate thing to do. I suspect that if the data looks appropriate, that they'll be able to move forward with administering that vaccine again. We were talking about, you all probably heard there's potentially a risk of blood clots. Very rare incidents of this, but because this is, we want to be appropriate and cautious. So they're going to hold it, they're going to look at the information. I think that's very appropriate. Yeah.
how effective are the Moderna and Pfizer for the variants?
Great question. So there is also building evidence that there is effectiveness against the variants, in particular against severe illness. And severe illness has a specific definition, which includes needing oxygen, hospitalization, and of course, death from coronavirus. So it's not complete yet, but the evidence does look very good for at least some protection against those variants. Great question. Any other questions? So, strategy for the current school year. So when we met, and this is a very succinct summarization, but essentially the board and administration determined that based on the lockdown lessons of the spring, in which it was quite difficult to maintain students, at times could be difficult to maintain good student serve adherence and those qualities of virtual education, that it was important, if at all possible, to do in-person education if we can do that. And then, but do that while providing for a safe environment. So we enlisted a number of different resources from CDC, from actually a wide variety of different resources to increase building safety, to find ways to mitigate risk, to reduce potential exposure and interaction. We've been remarkably successful during the course of this school year. In fact, Darlene, it's fair to say that we've had no kind of horizontal transmission within the school, meaning, spread of the virus amongst students.
Correct. We have not been able to identify any student-to-student transmission or any transmission that took place within the school building.
Which I think is a remarkable fact. And Darlene has been fastidious about tracking and monitoring this, and so if that had happened, I think we would have seen the evidence for that. So we came up with a plan to mitigate risk while providing in-person remote options. So we have a couple of things to sort through. One of those includes strategy for the following year and the end of this year. Challenges, as we kind of noted, the vaccines versus the variants. The vaccines are very effective. Variants really crop up that potentially put at risk the effectiveness of vaccines. We don't always know, and we have to wait for that data to come in. They do look like they're good, but new variants are presenting all the time. Darlene noted that there's the Brazilian variant, South African, the British, Californian variants have all been noted here in our region, in recent weeks. Which variant is predominating now, Deb? Which one? The UK one.
Contributes to about 50% of our cases in Wisconsin.
And so the big challenge with this one, and actually the big question is, we see that younger individuals are more at risk. It seems to be more infectious or more easily spread among younger individuals, including students. And so that's the big question mark that we don't know the answer to yet. Michigan, as we all know, is starting to have a rise in cases. As Darlene noted too, we're probably about 1 to 2 weeks behind Michigan, but we are starting to see a rise in cases. Incidence at the hospital and the community has been maybe anywhere from 3 to 6%, and now we're seeing that rise 8%, in roughly that range in terms of new cases now. So that's an increase that is just beginning recently. So, and then ultimately, just the uncertainty that comes with all of that. So, in terms of trying to make decisions, we're going to ask the board to consider, some options in terms of, to consider continuing the mask mandate here for our students. And, in regard to that, we run into some collision of values sometimes. There's a strong desire, I would say, among many people for autonomy, while at the same time we have a strong responsibility to keep people safe. And so those two values really do collide in trying to figure out what the right thing is to do. Same thing for equity versus risk mitigation, and thinking about ways of helping students learn versus reducing risk of exposure. So we've had to make those determinations, the board has had to make those determinations during the course of the school year. So, I just want to state in regard to that, as the medical advisor, I would strongly encourage continued wearing of masks at the Unified School District, that we continue with that mandate. I think that if you look at DHS, if you look at Department of Health Services, if you look at the CDC, all the guidelines are indicating right now is not the time to relax those measures. That mask wearing, we know is effective, it reduces risk. Students have actually adapted quite well to the risk at this time. And that if we can continue to vaccinate and appropriately protect people, that we'll be able to get through this and continue to reduce the risk to our students. Now, I know that individuals often will, we note that this has been an illness that does primarily affect older individuals. I'll just share with you that I've taken care of younger patients that certainly are alive, but had COVID and have had respiratory and other effects from this. This is, often it's a condition that people have minimal symptoms from, and I have seen patients of all ages, 20s, teens, have significant effects from this virus. So we have an obligation as a school district to do our best to protect everyone, until they are eligible for the vaccine. At this point, 16 and above are the only eligible age groups for the vaccine. So there's a significant portion of people under our charge who are not eligible and are vulnerable. And so we have, I think that is a responsibility that I know the board has taken seriously, and would urge you all to strongly consider continuing the mask mandate within our school district. As a side note, I know individuals might say, and actually this is quite understandable, well, what about people who have been vaccinated? Do they need to wear masks? In a practical sense, if you're with other individuals who have been vaccinated, it's quite reasonable and safe not to wear a mask. The logistics of sorting that out, of knowing who has or hasn't been vaccinated, in terms of faculty, in terms of adults, that can be a bit tricky. So I think we want to present a unified front. Even if you've been vaccinated, it's important to wear a mask to show support to students that don't have the option or ability yet to be vaccinated, and so to just show that extra consideration. Future challenges, I think, challenge coming up in the next school year will be, when at some point the requirement for masking will end. Like, we won't need it. It will be difficult, I think, perhaps to know. And it's not always going to be an elegant process or really clear. But at some point, we're not going to be wearing masks. At some point, we're going to be hanging out together. We're not going to worry about it. We're not going to think about it. Initially, we're going to think about it. It's going to be tricky. But this time is coming, and I don't know when it is. And this is an important aspect of the board in terms of deliberating and in terms of Darlene and myself and our other medical experts really trying to do the best to figure out what is most appropriate. So I think there are a number of concerns or questions that will come up in preparing for this next school year that will merit good conversation and a vigorous conversation about the pros and cons. Certainly, when values are in conflict, I think it is the work of the board to decide which path we take. So that's not right now, but there will be a time when that does, when we'll, in particular, the board will need to share what the community feels is important. So just end with a quick, decision is the spark that ignites action. Until a decision is made, nothing happens. Decision is the courageous facing of issues, knowing that if they are not faced, problems will remain forever unanswered. And certainly, as board members, you're always asked to make decisions that sometimes are really straightforward and other times are difficult and contentious. And I thank you for your efforts and work in that regard. Thank you. Any questions?
Do you think if we wore masks next year and kept the social distancing, could we only just keep the kid home who tested positive? Do you think it would have worked this year? I mean, because it worked so good what we did. But if we wouldn't have to send 20 kids home at a time, we keep a lot more kids in the classroom.
It-
What would the trade-off be there? Is that-
JD, it's a very interesting question. I think what's going to end up happening, you're going to start to see, is probably sometime this summer, they're going to say 12 to 18-year-olds, 12 and above can get vaccinated. So then you're going to see an influx of students that have been vaccinated in particular. And I don't know how long it'll take for, all school-age children to be vaccinated, but it's likely to occur in this next school year. And so then, once that's made available, and depending on how cases are in the community, in the hospitals, I think, that's where it can be tough sometimes to sort out when we say, it's time for a mask to be done. And to your point, if you're vaccinated and you have an exposure, you can just do symptom monitoring. You do not have to be held out of school. Is that right, Darlene?
Correct.
Yes.
And they only stay home if they become symptomatic.
Yes. So that'll be a
If
significant
you're-
difference.
But what about if they're not, the other people are not vaccinated? Do you
At
still?
at this point, what the CDC is recommending is that, because there are so many kids, the vaccine is not available to such a large age group and so many people, and we do not know who has been vaccinated as far as, we can't ask who's been vaccinated, who hasn't at this point. But because there's so few children and students being vaccinated, we still have to contact trace for the 6 foot. So anybody within the 6 foot radius. The DHS and CDC now says it's appropriate to have 3 feet in between students in the classroom, but I still have to contact trace for the full 6 foot. So if you have kids 3 feet away from each other, instead of potentially sending home only 9 who surround an infectious person, I could potentially be sending home 18. As more kids come back into the schools, the class sizes are getting bigger, so therefore the distance between the kids is narrowing.
So if they're within 6 feet, you still have to send those kids home?
If they are within 6 feet, if they're beyond 6 feet, I do not have to send them home, and I haven't sent them home.
What about a sports team then? Would that be the same with one exposure because the whole team got to hit the game, or just the one kid?
If it
Or
is a
within
sports,
6 feet?
yeah, if it is a sports team, because they're in the same locker room, they're riding the same bus, they're sitting on the same bench, they're playing the sport together, we have quarantined whole teams.
I do see.
Because we don't know when they're playing, how long they've been together, when they get really close, and the 15 minutes is a cumulative now. It's not just one exposure for 15 minutes, it's throughout the whole game, adding up to 15 minutes. We don't know. And we've actually isolated our team, quarantined our team, because of their exposure to other teams. Because we don't know at that point.
And I do suspect as we progress, as vaccination becomes more common with, I would imagine with athletes as well, that you'll see that being less of an issue because they'll be appropriately protected and they won't have to quarantine. Very good question.
I saw Moderna started vaccinating 6-month-olds, or at least doing the trial. Did Pfizer do the same thing?
I'm not sure if Pfizer has, but you're right. I believe both have begun with both those measures, so to look at younger individuals, exactly. So, and essentially they test on smaller groups because they're looking for dosing, appropriate efficacy, like how strong a dose to get the right amount of effect, which doesn't take 30,000 or 15,000, it takes thousands. So they should come about sooner.
Patrick, with the notation you had up there regarding herd immunity, when? Has there been any guidelines from, let's say, CDC or DHS or whatever that says, here's a percentage or a number that we have to achieve in order for it to be considered to be herd immunity?
Great question. We don't, there are two things going on with that. One is that you get immunity to some degree from individuals who have been infected, certainly in the first 6 months. You get some immunity as well, obviously from vaccinated individuals, and those two combined. So it can be hard to know that for sure. So what will probably happen is it will be expressed primarily in numbers in a region. So both hospitalizations and total numbers. So that will be the marker. If the hospitalization and total infectious numbers are staying low persistently, then you eventually will see, and you can assume that there is some manner of herd immunity going on once you have the vaccine available to everyone. Kids present as a large reservoir of uninfected individuals that can prevent effective herd immunity. So you probably won't see that until the vaccine is fully available to everyone. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Jim?
I'm not sure of the terminology, but is there any research into the half-life of an antibody, or how long the vaccination or
great question.
infection lasts?
So there are a couple of interesting points about that. The immune system is incredibly complex. Initial response to an infection is the production of antibodies by B cells. And so they make so you get the first vaccine, the body kind of puts a little energy and investment in, or if you get infected once, kind of puts a little bit in. The body's like, I don't know if we're going to see this virus again. We don't want to waste a lot of time on it, make you feel really tired. You get the booster, and then you get the body's like, oh, so this is going to keep happening. Gives a pretty strong, robust antibody response. But then typically antibody response, it can wane. It's usually longer with vaccination or more consistent because we can measure and provide an accurate dose. So, but that can be anywhere from 6, 9, 10 months, sometimes longer, but often that wanes. But then the other aspect of immunity is memory T cells, which get activated when you have the infection as well. So, I think a really good example of this is measles. There's been no cases of measles from anyone who's been vaccinated with appropriate dosing of the measles vaccine. But you can test sometimes, and sometimes there aren't antibodies or titers. So memory T cells, we know, play a significant role in that immune defense. And that's part of the big question. The other part of that, too, is how much a virus mutates over time. In a way, we're fortunate. Coronavirus, it does have variants and changes, but it doesn't change as much as the flu. The flu is a lumpy, difficult to get a good immune response sort of virus that changes all the time. The coronavirus changes, but it's not nearly as much. And it's got these really big spikes on it. They are really a good way of making an antibody response that the body will recognize. So I think potentially it could be a very good longer-term response. Will we need boosters or not? Will they be recommended? It's hard to say for sure. Yeah, great question. Anything else? Is it okay to take? It's my cousin. I hate to turn him down. Kevin, go ahead.
The question is, when do you think we can get back to 5-day school weeks?
Well, that's not a question for me. Certainly, that's a board decision, and it's a very, very reasonable question.
From a medical standpoint, though.
Well, I think, I will say that we've done a very good job addressing safety within the school district, and so it's something that I know that the board has talked about and discussed, and I'm sure they will discuss further, but I would hopefully anticipate at a bare, as a bottom line, that we would potentially should be able to go back to 5 days a week school next year for sure. I'm not speaking I don't want to speak out of hand,
But you're right, that's what the board did.
that's right. So there we go.
And I do think it is noteworthy, too, that the board reached consensus and gave us the directive that everyone entering our buildings will be masked prior to the governor's mandate. So I just
Oh, that's
applaud
great.
you for
Oh, thank you
your-
for, yeah, that's great.
I applaud you for putting safety first, and it is working. So
It is.
thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Thank you all, thank you to the board for your efforts.
We also had a meeting with Patrick earlier today, central office staff and Tom Schofield, because we're starting to get requests about students now on certain field trips. So, for example, we talked about opening or not opening, but having our students visit the aquatic center. So we can start scheduling that. It'll be one cohort at a time, and working with Darlene, we have all kinds of mitigation strategies in place. Same with Neboken. We want kids out there this spring, and so, of course, that's a little bit better situation because of the outdoors. But then Beth Decker at the high school is getting a lot of building rental requests, building use requests. So as a rule of thumb, we're going to continue doing what we've been doing this year in terms of limiting capacity with number of spectators, et cetera. And anything student-related will likely happen with our current mitigation strategies in place. However, if there is an outside entity wanting to rent our building that has nothing to do for the benefit of students, we are proposing that we ask for a vaccination, proof of vaccination, because as you know, we're only allowing spectators in the buildings, so this would be just that one more effort to, keep the virus out, so to speak. And if it's not benefiting students, we felt we could take it to that next level. And that concludes our COVID update. Any questions for me or?
Do you think we'll have to keep disinfecting the classrooms next year? Are we confident enough that we don't really spread by surface?
I'll speak to that. I think it's appropriate hand washing and just reasonable kind of standard measures for cleaning are appropriate. We don't have to do any particularly invasive or extensive measures. Increasingly, we are aware that the virus is spread by airborne and droplets, not generally by fomite or contact with surfaces. So I mean, we should still wash our hands. If something's dirty, we should wipe it down. But we would not have to continue with extensive sort of cleaning regimens.
Okay. Anything else before we move on? Then we'll just go on to board member meeting legislative report. And I handed out these. This was, I went to the listening session for Calvin Callahan and the listening session for Mary Falkowski, and I gave them both the same letter. And it covered three things here: low revenue limit ceiling, special education, and sparsity aid. And I did get a response from Senator Falkowski, and she told me that yes, she supports the increase in the low revenue limit ceiling, and she will work to get that raised. She also said she supports special education categorical aid, but said that that is, to put a number on it at this time, she wouldn't give me a number, because there's too many things going on in the budget there, so that would sound like that would happen. And on sparsity aid, she said somebody has, I forget who she said, has introduced a bill that would, if you spend over a certain amount, you get reimbursed for that amount. For everything over that amount, I should say. So everybody would be equal, as opposed to what sparsity aid is now, where everybody gets, I believe, is it $100, Tim?
Andy, we don't qualify, so I don't.
Yeah, we don't qualify. The only one that qualifies right now is those districts with an enrollment over 750 students.
Fewer than.
Under, yes, correct, under. And so we don't qualify. And so that was page one there. The other two pages is Tim and I were planning on going to the Joint Finance Committee is going to be in Rhinelander on April 21st, and we've just been working on what we might say there, and this is just a draft. The things in red, it doesn't mean anything that they're in red. It just means we're working on our draft. So, yeah, and when I went to the listening sessions, I kind of went as the board president. I think it would be good if, as a board, we said, or Tim and I could go and say we're speaking on behalf of the board. Is anybody opposed to that idea? Yeah. And so we'll get this on some school letterhead and, we'd go. And if anybody wanted to go with us, they're welcome to do that. It's April 21st. What I got said, you gotta be there at 7:30, so you can get out, get registered and get out of there by early to mid-afternoon, because the line could get long. And the other thing I sent you today was from John Humphrey's Association for Equity and School Funding. And so it was just the presentation he made, and he will apparently go to every listening session in the state and speak on a different topic at each one. And his was really an in-depth thing on the low revenue ceiling there. And obviously Tim and I aren't going into that much depth. But I think it's important that we do go testify. And then we got Calvin Callahan coming here sometime, right?
Mm-hmm.
Potentially.
I don't have the date memorized. Do you, Mary Kay?
May 3rd, early May.
Early May.
Sometime in May. Okay, that's, does anybody have anything else on? Okay. And I'll just say that Mr. Barta was also at the listening session for Mary Kalkowski and spoke on low revenue ceiling, right? Yeah, okay. He was there, he spoke. We'll go on to the next item, item B, 2021-22 calendar revision.
So you have already approved next year's district calendar, but tonight we don't ask for reapproval. We just want to show you the proposed changes, and then we would ask for your approval at the next meeting. So the calendar has, the first attachment, or page 1, has the color-coded like it always has. But the notes that I would draw your attention to are on page 2. And really what we would like you to consider when you vote next meeting would be at the bottom. So there's a combination of what we are attempting to do to minimize interrupted learning that we experienced last year, and to a lesser extent this year. So one of those strategies would be to add 3 additional student days. And 3 doesn't sound like much, but when you look at the teacher handbook, it does state 190 days, and we were coming in under that 190 in recent years. So we're proposing that we move it up to 190, and that gives our students 3 additional days. We would ask you next meeting to have a resolution for DPI that supports us starting before September 1st, but only 2 days. And again, if you think, well, why just 2 days? It's because we all agree as educators that the longer you go in June, it feels like, and I don't have any hard data to give you other than teacher anecdotal data, it feels like we are losing students' attention in June. So we felt to hit it earlier, and then we wanted to balance the number of days in the semesters. So that's what you'll see on this version. And also, teachers are very fond of the Friday schedule, and by that I mean they have found it to be extremely valuable for their collaborative time. So what we wanted to do was better infuse those throughout this calendar, so there's 1 day almost each month, But instead of just saying, 8 hours or 7 hours of collab time, we're going to infuse professional development into that. It'll be the first time that we have made a concerted effort to have not meaningful professional development, but have it actually pertain to their collaboration and what they are working on on that same day. So we're pretty excited about that. And what is yet to be determined is, on those days do we allow, or on certain days do we allow staff to work from home again like we did this year? And what about those professional development collab days? Are those remote learning days for students? If that answer is no, we are covered with our number of instructional minutes. But if we add really solid learning objectives for those professional development days, it's like I said to one teacher, it's not having to do both in-person and remote the same day again. Instead, learning continues, on a limited basis. We don't want the kids on those days in front of their Chromebooks 8 hours, but select meaningful learning objectives to keep that process going. So this is the draft we'll bring back to you at the end of the month. Are there any questions I can answer for you at this time, however?
I have a question. If there's snow days, are we going to run the snow days like remote days?
We would.
Okay.
Yep, just like we did this year.
Okay, because I'm looking here at the 8th and 9th, and when it's after Memorial Day where it becomes a real struggle to try and keep everybody going. And I was thinking that if there was snow days to, time to be made up, we'd be getting way into June. So if we're going to go remote on weather days, that's good.
Good question, and yes, our intention would be to not add any days in June despite weather. Good point.
How do you think parents would feel about a few more days with kids not in school?
Actually, JD, it doesn't come out to be all that many. It would be just 3 from the original draft. So we just disperse them differently, but vacations remain the same, and what I would call the days that families are used to having off are still in the calendar.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Then we'll go on to the insurance renewal.
Justin, am I able to plug in so people that don't have it on board docs can?
Well, Sarah's in the meet, so it would cut her off from that, and actually it would sort of disrupt the screen a little bit.
Can you
share your screen?
Would it be appropriate
Whoa,
since Sarah's hanging out
I
there
would
and we
have
could
time.
line at the moment to
Sarah
just
go first?
flip flop and let Sarah go first?
I say, yeah, we let Sarah go first and then,
She's there.
Okay, I guess we could do
Is
that.
that
is that
okay, Tim?
okay?
Andy, does that require a motion?
Yeah, it's really supposed to change at the beginning of the meeting, right?
No, my apologies.
Why don't we go with looking at our screens and,
Okay,
Okay.
all right. So what I would like you to do is go ahead and, the first document there is, I think it's labeled concierge, maybe, for employees. And back in November of last year, Melanie Ryan put out an RFP for benefit consulting services. And we had been on a long run with Ansey and Associates. And I included this document just to introduce the 2 people. Back up there, but the insurance committee selected R&R Insurance Services as our benefit consultants. And the 2 key people for the Anago account is first Jen Dash is the primary contact for our staff that have insurance-related claim issues that are unresolved for them. So she's their point contact. And then our primary consultant for the district is Michelle Froke. So when I refer to R&R, it's primarily the work of Michelle and her team. So then if you want to open up the renewal document, and I'm going to just call out the slides as we go. And so if we're on slide 2 already, we're going to talk a little bit about our claims history. We're going to talk about the renewal process. And I'm going to try to walk you through a summary of the financial impacts. And then a little bit about the change in going from ANSI to R&R. So why don't we go ahead and look at slide 3. So this is a review of our claims history, and it's from January 2020 through December of 2020. And the bottom line is we've had a loss ratio that exceeds the amount that we paid in for claims. And we're running at, over that 12-month period of time, 106% loss ratio. So when you talk about going out for renewal, this is kind of like a case that we're kind of at a point that isn't a great point for going out on renewal. So Michelle and her team have looked a little more detail at the analytics, and if we go to the next slide, the first thing they did is they wanted to find out where are we utilizing all the claims, and they looked at the breakdown between prescription meds and medical services. And essentially what she's saying in the comments below there is we're really right on par for the national norm, where 20% of our cost is prescriptions and 80% is services. And then she's taken that table that we saw in the previous slide and just put it out on a graph. And she's showing the red line is paid premiums, and then the blue line is our utilization, our claim utilization by month. And in a typical year, what you're really hoping to see is you're hoping to see the total incurred claims below the premiums paid. And in our case, we're hoping that ideally we could see a utilization of about 85% would be the sweet spot. So there'd be a spread between those two lines of about $45,000. And we would be in a much better situation to go out for renewal. Michelle did a little more looking at the data. And I'm going to focus in on the pie chart. So when we look at what's happening with our group, we have high-cost claimants that are utilizing, a small group of employees are because of their current medical situation, are 42% of our total claims history. Let's go ahead and move down to the next slide. So based on our claims history, and given some of the restrictions we've had with COVID and being able to meet with R&R on a personal basis and having rigorous discussions with the group, unless we were really prepared to make significant changes in our plan design, now is not the time. In Michelle's as her consultant, her recommendation, now is not the time to consider self-funding. She approached the group health trust, and they declined to quote based on our claims history. I've seen articles recently over the last couple months that municipalities and school districts could save significant amounts of money by joining in the Wisconsin Employee Trust Fund, the Wisconsin plans. So I asked Michelle to look at that. And the way that the systems work, there are 15 plans, different plans available to employer groups. And those plans change depending on where you are in the state of Wisconsin. But they also look at they do an analysis of your claims history. And then you don't get quoted as the group. your group gets isolated based on your claims history, and then you're assessed surcharges. And they don't have a plan that's similar to ours, but if we went with their typical high deductible healthcare plan, we would be seeing increases in excess of 15%. So again, because of our claims history, now is not the time to do it. And Michelle's recommendation was to stick with WEA Trust because they know our claims history. And because of our unique situation this year, it's likely that future claims history may be significantly different. And she also heard a resounding message from our insurance committee that because our folks have kids everywhere, they use different networks, they weren't interested in this year switching to a very narrow network or a PPO. So as a result, she went ahead and negotiated with the WE Trust. So let's go to the next slide. So you can see where we started at with the family and single premiums. WEA came back with a 9.8% increase in premiums. Michelle went ahead and negotiated a 7.8% increase. And she also proposed an alternative plan. And what I'd like to do, and that came in at a 2.2% premium increase. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to focus on what that plan looks like in comparison to the negotiated proposal. So let's jump down to the next slide. Okay, so our plan is a little gimmicky, and I'm going to be throwing around a lot of numbers. But essentially our current plan, and when you see that 5,000/10,000, it's single family. And I'm not going to say, I'm going to try to avoid saying 5,000 single, 10,000 family, just a 5,000, 10,000 and know that that's what it is. So our plan design is a qualifying high deductible health plan. And so it's a 5,000, 10,000. Our employees are responsible for a first $1,400 or $2,800 deductible. After they've reached their deductible, the district's HRA kicks in. And the HRA then picks up between the 1,400 and the 5,000. Then, and I'm using the single as this example, and then after the 5,000, the HRA is also covering coinsurance for essentially the next $5,100 for a total of $6,500 or $6,050. Does that make any sense? So that's how the plan operates. We have this HRA piece that's responsible essentially for that deductible and also responsible for the coinsurance. What we're proposing to switch to is to go to a straight high deductible healthcare plan. It's $6,550 to $13,100 deductible. The employee's responsibility is going to be increasing $100 for a single, $200 for a family, to $1,500 and $3,000. The HRA then is going to be picking up, and if we use the single again, after $1,500, the HRA, the next dollar gets picked up by the district's HRA account, up to $6,550. There's no more coinsurance.
Can you explain what the coinsurance was again? The rest made sense up until you got to the...
So let's keep it in round numbers. I think the family side's easier. So if you're a family, you're going to pay, this year you're paying $2,800 deductible. That's yours first. Then we have this account
that is the district's money, and it shows up, so everybody knows, it's showing up as a fund balance. The HRA is part of our fund balance. And that is in a segregated account at Covantage, but it's administered by a company called DBS. So now you go into the doctor, you're above your $2,800. The district pays up to that $10,000. Now at $10,001, WEA Trust is starting to pay, but the district is on the hook for another 20% of those dollars, up to essentially $20,000. We're gonna pay 20% of that for the next 10,000. Am I making that clear, J.D.?
So now we would have, in the old plan?
In the old plan.
But now we will no longer have to pay up to the 20,000.
No, we're gonna go to 13,100.
Seems a lot better as a,
Well,
why even?
the flip side is we have to balance which is going to occur more, a 20% up to 20,000, or everybody up to 13,100. So that's the balancing act.
So they're gambling on if we have really sick people or just a little sick people?
Again, I don't know if I like the term gambling, but so let's go ahead and jump down. Any other questions so far? So now I believe I'm on slide 9. So there you can see, and it's just big numbers. It's showing you the district's single premiums and the family premiums. But the net effect of making that change is an increase in premium cost of $61,156. Then if we go down to the next slide, but I just told you we're going to increase we're increasing the HRA liability. So the district's portion, so it's almost like, sort of like self-insurance. And we're essentially using the HRA plan to buy down insurance premiums. The account is shared by all the employees. Some employers run an HRA on an individual employee basis. Ours is a group HRA. So it's the district's insurance. Anything that isn't utilized, we get to carry over and use year after year. So we're saving significant amounts of money by not having to have that. It's sort of self-insurance. And what we've learned over the last several years is our utilization from the average employee. They tap into the HRA at about a 35% rate. So that additional liability of $153,000 is actually, we're estimating that cost because we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we're estimating that at $53,620. So that's an additional cost that has to be included in the premium. So now I want to skip slide 11 and I want to jump down to slide 12. Okay, so what we've done is I told you we switched to R&R for a consulting agreement. So that's what's called a purchase service, and I don't want to get into the accounting side of it, but Ansay and Associates, our former benefit consultant, got paid directly by WEA Trust as part of the insurance premium. And they were getting 2% of our premium costs. And when R&R talked to us, they talked about, well, if your health insurance costs are going up, why should I get a raise? And this year, effectively, Ansay was paid $72,500. R&R gave us a 2-year agreement, and they did their cost at almost less than half of that. So it's $37,500. And that's pulled out of the premium. So that 2% increase, 2.2% increase in premium, part of that is due because they pulled out their consulting fee, and we're paying that directly. Okay, now that we're paying that directly, our employees pay 12% of the premium cost. I didn't think it, I had conversations with Julie, and we didn't think it was right that employees not bear some of that cost of paying that premium. So we're proposing to raise the employee share to 12.15% of premium cost to cover 12% of the cost of the consulting agreement. Does that make sense to the board? Okay, and then since we're on this slide, I'm going to take just a little breather and talk a little bit about R&R. So one of the things that's the insurance committee over time, you know, we went for several years where we had very low loss ratios. In fact, we were multiple years where we had a 0% increase in healthcare. And when that kind of happens, the community got a little bit stagnant. We had retirees that were really into insurance, retired and moved off on their own. And we had retiree representatives that actually aged out of the plan. And so the committee kind of lapsed into, the only time we get together was during renewals. Well, R&R is re-engaging our insurance committee. And in particular, they're doing bi-monthly little video clips trying to make us all better utilizers of insurance. And an example might be for minor things that could be diagnosed with a virtual visit, you know, that costs us $49 instead of an office visit. And during COVID, those fees were actually waived and they were free. But if our staff doesn't know about the importance and the impact on the plan, we might not be smart users. So they're working very hard to educate our staff. And with this next renewal, they're going to do just a better job of educating our staff and all of the benefits that we offer, and in particular, how to reduce their healthcare costs. All right, so now let's go back to slide 11. And this is just an example of the impact on, if you look at the single and family impact on max out of pocket in 2021 versus 21-22, and in a worst case scenario, it would be 5.7 to a 5.5% increase for each one of our eligible participants. And I know I've thrown a lot of information, but let's take a look then at the final slide, number 13. So from the district standpoint, your next year, when you look at, like in particular, the business office operation, you're going to see a $37,500 increase in purchase services because we are now paying a consultant fee. We're going to see an increase in insurance premiums of $61,156. We're increasing our HRA liability by $53,620 for a total renewal of a cost of $152,276 for about a 4% renewal. And our employees are going to experience an out-of-pocket increase for premium only of 3.45%. So at the next meeting, I'll be asking you to approve this renewal. In between now and then, I know I've thrown a lot of information and the slides may be difficult to understand. If you want more information, please don't hesitate to ask me. And between Michelle, Folke, and myself, we'll try to answer your questions.
So originally you said the alternate proposal was 2.2%, but then you just said the overall one is going to be 3.4. Is that?
So what I'm doing, JD, is I'm taking the additional increase in reducing our premium cost. So if you look at the 2.2, that was strictly Michelle's cost for premium only. So just the premium portion of the bill is increasing 2.2%. But because we're raising the employee share a little bit, the district share is dropping off just a little bit. And then we're covering the cost for the additional HRA dollars and then the additional commission. You know, it's a difficult path because the advantage is the HRA over the last, it's probably been in place for 10 years or better. It has saved the district significant amounts of money. But, you know, we're getting to the point where our deductible, truly our liability is getting to be pretty great as well. So, but I don't know how we as a group or society, you know, contain healthcare costs.
Tim, because of COVID, didn't everybody's insurance usage go up? I mean, do they consider that it would go back down next year, or?
Andy, I think our loss ratio, I think I think you eventually, you're gonna trend towards the average, right? The average of your community. And we're hoping to revitalize our wellness committee. You know, we're gonna try to promote, do a better job of being a smarter consumer. And we know if we can get people to go to either virtual visits or walk-in clinics, that's a lot cheaper than going to the emergency room. And those are the kinds of things we can do to curb it. But when people get ill, and seriously ill, it's a very, very expensive proposition. And we're hoping our loss ratio goes to the better.
Okay. Insurance never goes down. Okay, any other questions on this? Then it'll be coming back the regular meeting. And we'll go on to item D is new position analysis. And just talk Amy or Jake.
Yep, Amy, Jake, and I will each briefly take one. Want to go first, Amy, on the instructional coaching?
So before you have a proposal. In the past, we've had additional coaches in our coaching fleet here, but we haven't had a secondary coach. That's why I'm bringing forward this proposal. We'd be using ESSER 2 funds to fund the position for the next 2 years. And it's really to improve the progression we have in our coaching structure. Right now, we've been very heavy with our ELA implementation and at our elementary and middle level, but it's never really extended into our high school level to improve strategies and just individual teacher growth. We have one coach that focuses on 4 through 12 and sustaining that many staff, and regular cycles of improvement isn't feasible for one person. So we'd like to see a more consistent platform for all of our teachers' growth.
Okay.
What kind of person do we look to hire to be a coach? Is it take a master's degree or a teacher for a couple years, or is it someone who's currently a teacher, or whoever applies?
What we've noticed over the years is that our best coaches have come from within and are people that our teachers trust and were also good teachers themselves and are able to be good listeners and kind of just listen and also help people take the next meaningful steps forward for them. So we're always kind of thinking how to grow our own leaders too. So they're seen as instructional leaders in our schools.
How long does the funding last?
Well, currently 2 years, but we are hearing that there's potentially a third round that would come forward as well. And so we'll see where that goes.
Jake, you want to go next?
Yep. So this position would be one part-time housekeeper. It'd be 19 and a half hours a week. it would initially be funded out of ESER 2 and then the general fund after that. The scheduling differences between this year and next year would leave us either choosing to add more hours to do the same amount of cleaning or reduce the amount of cleaning in the elementary schools. Over the years, I think that there's been sometimes where the elementary schools have probably been our most difficult places to get good cleaning. Some more concerns have come from those buildings. I think primarily because we don't have dedicated cleaning in those buildings, and we're using the custodians for not only all-day coverage for anything that happens throughout the day, but then they're also fitting and cleaning as they can. Given the number of scheduling changes with things such as the Robin's Nest, bringing kids in a little earlier, and the changes within the scheduling as far as the specials and the cohorting and the lunch in the classrooms, I think that sometimes those seem like little things, but eventually they add up. And it, when you look at a custodian's day where they're really on a good day with no other things coming up, no snow to worry about, nothing out of the ordinary, they might get about an hour and a half worth of good cleaning done. When you look at the cleaning practices that we have started this year, mainly due to COVID, if we wish to continue those, I don't see them having enough time to do that properly without having the Friday to do the deep clean wipe down. What I mean by that is on a Monday through Thursday basis, they are using a sanitizing, disinfecting spray where they just spray the hard surfaces and that will kill anything that's on the surface. On Fridays, they physically wipe down, and that's with a neutral cleaner, that if we don't do that step, too much usage of that disinfectant will become sticky and then attract dirt over time. I think that the fact that we have not had one documented case of transmission within our building, I think that our cleaning practices, along with a number of the other things, have at least suggested that we've done a good job. And I would think that we would want to continue those, but I don't know how we could continue that with moving to 5 days if we don't add one part-time housekeeper.
When would he or she do that cleaning then at the end of the day? They do that?
They would be scheduled from like a 3:30 to 7:30, Monday through Friday.
And there'd be one in each building or one person that
Nope.
goes to 3 buildings?
It would be one person that would rotate through the 3 buildings. That would be their primary job. I would intend to keep them there 90–95% of the time. The thing that I have had difficulty with over the years is finding subs. I think that's generally across the board, no matter if it's teaching staff or my staff, especially given the dynamics of COVID across the board. There's been less people desiring to do sub work. I think that would be nice to have that as a backup option to try and help out when need be, but that certainly would not be their primary job. So
Like subbing, like teaching a classroom, or like
Nope,
subbing
no.
to help you clean?
for my staff.
Okay.
But, most of the time I would hope that all 5 days of the week, they would be at elementary school. So that would mean that 2 elementary schools would get 2 days a week on a rotating basis. So,
Okay, sounds good to me.
We have one more, and that's mine. Speaking of subs, we would also like to use our federal dollars to hire a full-time sub per level, so that's a total of 3. Elementary would be on a rotation basis, middle and high school. We took this idea from many surrounding districts who put those people in place already this school year, when subs have been so scarce. And so we'd like to, since the dollars are available to us, do that next year, because right now, sometimes, not every day, and I just want to thank all of those who are subbing this year, but sometimes we limp along and we are having to put, as you know, a support staff person to supervise while a teacher then is coming through the screen, etc. And we know that these people would be kept very busy every day, either with a full-time sub load or with assisting in other areas if subbing isn't necessary. So again, we bring these 3 positions, or 3 proposals rather, more than 3 positions, back to you at the end of the month.
Is the money restricted? Could you spend that on anything you wanted, or is it designed for staffing?
It is designed for staffing, but other things too. Anything we can do to just get back on track educationally. But we've been meeting about that quite often to make sure that we are following guidelines and restrictions if there are any, and to make sure that we know, because different pots of money have different requirements, like AGR, for example. So we're meeting about that consistently to make sure we're spending dollars where they're best suited.
And are we on track, Tim, that we will use up all that money in the appropriate time?
Yeah, so in the first go-around, we got the CARES money. We've spent all the first allocation that we had. We are going to be carrying over some of the second allocation that we got in gear. We met over the last couple of weeks to decide how we're going to do the CARES 2 money, which is what these positions would be coming out of. The allocation that we received is $2.1 million, and we made the conscious decision that's over a 2-year period. So, the potential to fund these positions certainly would extend to at least another 2 years after this, 2 years from the start of the next school year.
Okay, so for the next 2 school years. Okay. Okay. Any other questions on those positions?
What would the pay rate be for the full-time sub? Any idea?
We haven't talked about that. Well, we did once, Tim, but we had talked about a starting teacher salary.
Yes.
We know that there would be benefits available since it would be a full year position. So probably commensurate with the starting teacher salary.
Okay. If there's no other questions, we'll go on to item E, technology purchases. There's 3 proposals on that same sheet. We'll take one at a time for questions and everything. The phone system upgrade. 5 years ago, we entered a deal with Frontier to have a hosted phone system. So at that point, we bought all the phones that are in our classrooms and offices and everything, and they charged us a monthly fee to host the software and everything that actually runs the phone system on their end. So that up until now, that's always been at their buildings. So that contract runs out on June 30th. So their Frontier does not do the hosting program anymore. So what this will do, will bring all of the stuff that we were paying a monthly fee for in that hosted and bring it to our sites. So we'll have a server with the software on. We'll have the box at the high school where all the contract, all the connections are. That'll connect that phone system to the dial tones and everything. So we're basically taking away that rental fee and now purchasing it ourselves. And this will be a 5-year contract again. So at the end of that 5-year contract, we'll own everything we need to do to run the system, and we'll own all the phones. So then at that 5-year span, talk about how you want to do it. But then you basically want to update some phones if you want. But otherwise, the whole phone system would be ours after this. So that-
Mark, do you recall what, like when we did the conversion, what a typical phone system would cost? I mean, we spent on the neighborhood of about 300,000, right?
Yeah, it was pretty close to that, yeah. I mean, just the phones are the expensive part. The cheapest phones in these systems are about $350 each. So, but I can't remember the total it was for 10 years ago. You know, they're charging us a little over $3,000 a month for that service of having down the host all the software and the server and everything at their site. So,
Does Frontier, they don't own the software, it's some other company? They'll still be
Mitel is
updating
this
it.
phone system that we have through Frontier.
Say that again, what's it called?
Mitel?
Mitel. So it's a company out there, they'll be around.
Exactly, they'll be around for a long time, yeah. In fact, they just bought out another competitor of themselves like a couple of years ago that was short now. They bought them all now too, so. They'll be around for a while.
Do phones get a lot of use in the classrooms?
Phones?
Yeah.
Not in a classroom on a normal day, it's a phone like you'd use your phone on the wall.
Yeah.
You know, it's the offices that take advantages of the more popular, but what's convenient is that before we went to this is that the high school, middle school, and admin office had their own phone system, and then the other ones around all on their own, so individual little phones. Since we did this now, we can pick up Julie can pick up and dial an extension to talk to a teacher out west. You know, she doesn't have to dial an outside line and then go to the extension. Everybody's on the same system. The buildings are.
Okay.
It's very difficult for vendors to give bids. Mitel has a system that you have to be a partner with like us would be a partner with Mitel, or Frontier would be a partner with Mitel, so it's really hard to get somebody else to bid on it. Camera Corner was nice enough with a lot of talking and a lot of prodding, because you do a lot of business with them. They were able to just give you some sort of an idea of what it would be to try and go away from Frontier. And even if we chose to go with Camera Corner, we'd still have to pay the $1,000 and wait a week for the transfer to happen. So not only are they cheaper, but it's just an easier format. I couldn't talk to anybody else to give me a bid because they knew it would have been a waste of their time.
Okay.
So any questions on that phone? Okay. The next one is the media production server. What I want to do here is Ben Wilhelm, does all the dubbing of all the videos and everything for sports and everything. He's on one server right now that end of service is the middle of July. Dave Kerr, the media production instructor, also has a server that's end of life in end of July. They won't service any parts, they won't service anything anymore, so they both have to get replaced. What I want to do is combine those two with this a little bit beefier server, more space, a lot more. The processors and everything else are so much better. That's what this bid is for, to combine those two. I'm asking Camera Corner's bid to be accepted only because the MNJ and the SHI bids don't include any labor. So by the time you added labor to that, they'd already be up over the top. And at Camera Corner, we're actually using their labor through E-rate, giving 80% back from them. So I know the number right there might be a little bit higher, but overall they'd be a lot cheaper trying to get labor costs there with the other two. Questions about that server? Okay. And the last one, if you remember, we did video scoreboards on the other two courts last year, between the last 2 years. So now Court C's scoreboard, that's over 20 years ago, because I'm pretty sure they brought it from the old gym, and they got tore down and brought it here. That was the court that it landed on. That one's over 27 years old, so that needs to be replaced. there's an expensive projector right now that the PE department is using to project like exercise videos and stuff like that to do on court seat during their classes. So to replace both of those, we're well into a third of having the same setup as the other courts do for A and B. So that's what this bid is for, is to replace that video scoreboard. And to get them, all three of them working together simultaneously, we can have the same thing up there and hold them at the same time. They can use them individually. So it's more of a bid just to keep things the same through all three courts.
The first two, did Tom pay for with his athletic budget?
What was that, I'm sorry?
Did Tom pay for with his athletic budget? He has like extra money and some fund from sectionals?
He gave a big portion of it, yeah, between the donations and his own budget, right?
So this one, the districts would be funding, no general funds?
Right.
How big were they? I never still got to manage to go see them.
How big or what?
How big are the TVs? It's like big as that screen or like bigger?
I want to say they're 10 by 14.
Yeah, they're big, something like that,
Yeah,
yeah.
they're
So like that wall or like I have.
Bigger than that.
yeah, 10 feet by 14 feet, just the screen itself.
Yeah, close to the size of that board, maybe a little shorter,
The
but,
wall itself, yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So you didn't get a second? I did not get a second bid. Couple of reasons. Soundworks is what put in the first two. And they, at that point, they outbid the other opponents by $5,000 to $8,000. So again, to ask them to put in a bid that they know they weren't going to get because they already lost the last ones. But if you need, I mean, definitely look into it. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to get one, but do we need one?
Well, my answer would be no, just because of the rationale that you just shared. And we do want the systems, we're going from 2 to 3, right? So we
Right.
want everything to be the same.
Correct.
So it's more or less, in my mind, an upgrade or an addition with the first.
Julie, I've had some conversations with Tom Schofield, and I have not had them with Jake, and I probably should have, but I know from Tom's perspective, he wants the setup to be seamless. You know, when you think of going from a classroom day to an event at night, and it's Tom and maybe the second shift custodian making the conversion, having a different vendor with a different operating system, it just has to be a plug and play. Here we go from volleyball to wrestling to gymnastics or whatever it might be. And they want a uniform driver. You know, I don't know enough about the technology, but I do know that, you know, we want to hold Soundworks' feet to the fire, that it just has to be the same.
Okay. Just, have you looked at that policy in a while? I wonder if it ought to be more lenient.
We just did last time with Jake, and that, he'll get to that later tonight for the flooring. So, yeah, I can't remember the actual date that it was updated, but I think if we consider it, like Mark was saying, a seamless upgrade rather than, going out for bid, is how we can.
Okay. It just seemed easier to change the policies
Right.
because this comes up where they
It
don't
does.
want to, if there's an exception in there, just saying
Yep.
there's no point going out for a bid because the last time we bid it, there was a big cost savings and no one will bid. It just seems like instead of us having this conversation, we just have that
I'll
exception.
check into that, JD, that's a good point.
Well, too, with what Mark's proposing, the continuity alone, if you try to link to similar systems, you've seen when we did the remote board meetings and people are coming in from all different directions and they can't link in, or this is broke, or this won't work, or whatever. This just makes a whole lot of common sense because it's going to make it easier on everybody.
Yeah. I hope it wouldn't be as bad as remote recording.
The one thing I do want to add is these screens are an array of smaller sections. So if we have 3 of the same, each screen may have, 30 some smaller squares in there that if one of those squares goes out, if all 3 of those screens are, it makes maintenance and servicing and that whole world a lot easier as well. If they're all the same, we have half the parts and we can, if we have to rob one off the third court C to make court A and B work for a event or whatever, we would have that option at least. If they're different, we'd be not able to.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Thank you. We'll see that at the regular meeting. And now we get to, food service update.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Sarah.
Okay. I'm meeting with you tonight because the food service department would like to purchase a new work dish machine for the high school. We've had that current dish machine for about 23 years, and it has been repaired already. We do have the funds because we still have an excess cash balance from last year. So we do have the funds to purchase the machine. However, because it's greater than $10,000, I do need board approval to purchase this machine. And we are supposed to spend our money by June 30th.
Okay.
I sent you guys a sheet before with the top line telling you what our excess cash balance is from last year and how we're trying to spend it down.
And you said this dishwashing machine would be at the high school or the? Okay.
Yes. 4 years ago, the summer of 2017, I got a grant and we replaced the dish machine at the middle school with a brand new dish machine from Hobart.
Okay. And,
I presume the bids are for identical machines, just two different vendors?
Yes. Strike Equipment is out of Wausau, and Castle Mix is out of Madison. We would most likely go with Strike Equipment because it is closer. And I do believe they kind of took over NASCO, and that was the company that put in our other dish machine.
okay.
Sarah, if I could ask, what are you expecting? Do you have any idea of what the installation fee for the plumbing and electrical and HVAC work might be?
That, Sarah, I'll take that, Sarah.
Okay, sure.
So the electrical, we have a booster heater right now that's in the mechanical room. It's been on our list to replace that right now anyways. So this new dishwasher has the booster heater built right in. We have a 90 amp circuit that we would have to wire into that additionally. Fortunately, we have a master electrician on staff, so we can do that in-house. It will be a little bit of material, but pretty basic. Likewise, when you look at the HVAC and plumbing work, most of that is very basic one-point connection. The HVAC side of it can be modified to use the same thing. There may be a fan that we want to replace due to past experience. We've had some flow problems, and the length of years that we've had that motor in place, we might want to upgrade that a little bit, but that would be the only major part of that. And the plumbing is basically a drain and then a hot water connect and a cold water connect, and both of those are right near the machine. So we have to have the plumbing contractor who installed the water softener verify the hardness of the water for Hobart. So he will do that, and he will do those two connections for us. But overall, very minimal expense on that.
Okay. Okay, so we'll bring that back at the regular board meeting for approval.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go on to item G, is the 10-year capital improvement plan and the connection to Fund 46.
Okay, so this is a big topic, and we've kind of been, if you want to say, kind of steered in a one-track path the last couple of years with the consolidation and items like that. We haven't had a whole lot of discussion on it because there was just things that we had to do to get our buildings reconfigured properly, right? So I just kind of wanted to start with, if you look at the Anago final report, and I kind of want to walk through this a little bit. It's a long document, 126 pages. This was compiled when Tim was in my position in 2013. He worked with CISA, and they finalized it in March of 2014. But I think that this is a good spot to start with a recap on where we've been, what improvements we've done, and where we need to move to next. So I guess the first page that I want you to look at, and the pages printed on the actual document itself are different than the number on the search feature on the top of the page. So on page 16, which is actually page 12 in the document, there's a graph. And I just want to talk about this one for a little bit. I think it's a good illustration on the condition of our building and what the pros and the cons are.
Page 13 of the document or of the PDF?
16 of the PDF, 12 of the document. So it should be a graph that says estimated life versus actual life. West Elementary. Okay, so as you look down this, there's a number of items, and there's the first gray line is 100%. 100% is the industry average life expectancy for each of those items. So as that bar graph moves to the right of that line, that means that we've went beyond its projected life expectancy. So when you look at that, you know, the VCT flooring, that's out over 300% of its expected life. Now when you look at that, there's some dynamics to it as far as the location of it. You know, the hallways are going to get more rougher traffic than the classrooms. And then when you look at our buildings, we've done the hallways first. You know, our classrooms have been left with the asbestos tile, and that's why we're going through now. You just approved the east abatement project, and now we have some left at the middle school. But for the most part, through the 3 elementaries after this year, we will be completely asbestos free. But then if you look back, if we start at the top, you look at things such as electrical panels, electrical service, water heaters. Going down, you have unit ventilators, air handling units, the controls for those, pumps and boilers. Those portions were all addressed and updated when we did the HVAC projects. We brought new 3-phase services into the buildings, and we put new piping and units in for the heating and cooling system in all 3 elementaries. Then as we go down, you look at the lockers and the cubbies. We did those last year. And then as you get into the flooring and you know, interior doors and hardware, you know, those are items that are on my list that we'll talk about after this document. So does that chart make a lot of sense, or does anybody have questions on that?
I'm just curious how much a 126-page report costs. Do you remember, Tim?
I
don't know.
I'm sorry, what?
How much did it cost to get this report?
JD, I don't know the exact number. I'm thinking it was a project that involved the better part of a year on and off with several engineers and several site visits. But I think that,
We'll find out. and
I'll
put
take
it-
a guess.
we can-
I mean, is it $50,000 or something for
less
something
than
like this?
It's less than that. But it's more than 25.
And the cost was kept down because Tim was smart enough to use CISA 10 services to keep it that way.
Okay, so if you just scroll down to the next couple pages, you'll see another chart where it starts categorizing things, and what they've done here is put priorities to these items. They got extremely granular in this report. That's why it's 126 pages. It literally lists everything down to, $3,500. And I'll explain how they got those priority rankings later on in the document. But if you can just kind of look through those, again, most of those items have been addressed in the past. So this document has been very valuable to keep us on the correct path and help us understand where our most important needs are, and also for budgetary reasons. As you get to the bottom of that, and this is a pretty important comment that I think that they make. At the bottom of page 19, it says that the total cost of the projects prioritized as the most immediate needs, which is the chart above, is $1.7 million. Just as a side note, looking at the actual cost of those, these numbers were lower than what they actually cost due to inflation over time. But anyways, that dollar amount, which is only a small part of the costs required and projects identified to bring the Unified School District of Antigo's 1960s era elementary schools and the middle and high school up to current health and safety standards. Again, these most immediate needs are primarily to address health and safety issues and do not address any other needs for 21st century learning environment. So what that means in a nutshell is our 1960s buildings were designed for educational purposes of that time. Obviously, there's parts of the middle school that have been upgraded. We have this edition that we're in is a 98, much more susceptible to current learning practices. Likewise with our high school. But I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind, that when we look at where we want to prioritize, does that look like remodeling needs, addition needs, what we want to do to address the learning environments that we have right now. And I am not an expert in what we need for the learning environment, but there's a great team of administrators that can certainly explain that at depth, but that's not my forte. All I know is that when I walk into a building and we have counselors literally in coat closets, that's typically a bad idea, I think, in general. I think we could all agree on that. So I know that there's needs that we should discuss and figure out a long-term plan to. What those solutions are, I don't know, but we should be having that conversation. So does anybody have any questions or comments about that?
How much do we spend on each electrical? Like 700,000 a piece? I mean, the HVAC?
It was the HVAC and electrical upgrade, and it was between 7 to 770 per building.
Did we do the electrical at the middle school, that big 150,000 one?
A big portion of it, yes, there's still one older section of electrical gear, but it's in pretty good shape. We had a electrical contractor come in and do an analysis on it. My first year here, it's pretty good, but when they did the 98 edition, they did a fair amount of the switch gear that fed a lot of the stuff. But specifically what you're referencing is that 150,000 is a lot of the main breaker panels that are kind of spread throughout the floors. We had old turn-in fuses still, and when we did the reconfiguration for bringing the new grade configuration of the middle school, we addressed that, one for better use of space and two to upgrade those concerns. There's still a few older devices in the building, but for the most part, they're all gone, and the ones that are remaining have been gone through. So I feel very good about that, but we do have a few more to do yet, but not 150,000.
I was just curious, because that's pretty close to the total value they have listed there.
Right. Anything else on that? Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Then if we want to go down to page 81. Everything in between there is just kind of a breakdown of, they kind of go into detail on pictures and descriptions and stuff building by building, which is also highlighted in the document we're going to. So, is everyone to page 81? You see the district-wide summary graph? Okay, so what this is, if you can look under the column of the scoring system, it ranks it by 4 categories: functional condition, safety, compliance, project cost, and annual savings. So things that would be efficiencies such as LED lighting, that would get a higher annual savings cost. Safety, that's very important. Some of the items that they really identified as high priority were exterior doors, secure entrances, which we have addressed throughout the district on those. But that's how they come to the total points and ranking them and where we should go. That I think is always up for debate a little bit. Every year it seems to go by, some things age better than others. So that I don't think that that's ever going to be an exact science. But it at least keeps us thinking the right direction and trying to plan the best we can and be ready for the things that may come up and bite us if possible. But then there's also things that have, like I mentioned about the elevator here at the middle school. It's 10 to 15 years past its expected life, but it's not had one single problem. And to spend $30-some thousand to replace it just because it says it should be, I don't think is necessarily a smart move either. If it goes down, we fix it and move on. It's not going to create a safety hazard or damage to the building or anything of that nature. So there's a balance in those things. But I went through this and I'll kind of save you all the details because I feel like I'm getting kind of long-winded on this, but I could talk for hours because this is my world most of the day. As I went through these top 5, 6, 7 pages of district-wide summary, I would say 90 to 95% of the items have either been addressed since Tim got the report done in 14. His big project was getting the high school re-roofed. And then all the way up until current, where we've done the consolidation that's helped eliminate a lot of the dollars that were allocated towards the 4 elementary schools that were no longer operating. The other items that were on there have been addressed through our HVAC projects, consolidation needs, and just our general remodeling from year to year. So I think that we've done a pretty good job keeping this data as a guiding light, but also making the right choices as we have made decisions with our structure throughout our district and which buildings that we're keeping or have kept. So basically, I guess the long and the short of it is I think we've done a pretty good job getting the bang out of our buck for the needs that we had. But that being said, this document, is now going on 7, 8 years old. And obviously, we've had a lot of changes in the structure of our district since then, and I think that we need to have a serious discussion on where we want to go from here. And that's why I brought the next document to you, because this next document, let's just go to it now if nobody has any other questions about this one. Okay, so if we look at the 10-year capital improvement plan, I kind of looked at this and made I wanted to kind of keep it correlated to the CISA report and the fact that these are kind of our most immediate needs, but I also didn't want to get so granular that we had a 126-page document again to look at right now. We can certainly get to that point whenever we want to, but I think a good place to start is these big capital improvement projects. As you look at the first item under the high school, that's the track resurfacing. That you approved last month. I would like to transfer that money into Fund 46 for that project. I guess I should do a little sidebar on Fund 46. Is everybody familiar with that, or do we want to talk about that quick?
You should talk about it.
Okay. So Fund.
Okay, let me cover that.
Okay.
I'll cover that. Yep. No, I mean, you can go ahead
Okay.
with the plan, and then I'll cover it a little bit.
Okay, so, but as you look down, then the next thing that I have on there is LED lighting. And that's similar in most categories. Under that, you see a couple things like boiler controls. Both the lights and boiler controls are efficiency things. The lighting upgrade I've been working on for, the last 6-8 months on wanting to really get serious about putting numbers to it. As we went through the consolidation process and we remodeled some areas, we've put LED lights into the places that we've remodeled. But that's such a small drop in the bucket. When you start looking at the LED lights alone, you can experience tens of thousands of dollars of savings every year. So I think that the quick preliminary numbers on if we were to go through the entire district and put brand new fixtures in everywhere is roughly $603,000 that would be the cost after the incentive rebate. But we would experience a cost savings on that of approximately roughly $60,000 a year. So certainly within 10 years, we would have that payback. Now, when you look at it building by building, the high school projections are roughly 8-year payback, and the elementary schools are closer to that 14-year payback. But the life expectancy of the fixtures in these numbers are close to 35-year life expectancy. So, you know, we're going to be,
The LEDs are 35-year life expectancy?
yeah,
How many times do you have to change the light bulb in that time? 5?
0.
30? Really? Wow.
Yep, 70,000 hour rated, and the average is about 1,900 hours a year we leave our lights on. Now that changes obviously from area to area a little bit, but that's a rough average. Now, if we wait, it only costs more and more every year. So we take that $60,000 that we would save and drag that out, you know, 5 years, that's $300,000 that we could have experienced those savings. So I think that the soonest we can get these LED lights upgraded, it'd be our top priority right now. So I have a lot of preliminary numbers, but that's gonna get into a further discussion about how we want to finance that. Some of these lighting companies offer some financing. Just for rough figures, you know, it may cost us $10,000 a year to finance this entire project over a 10-year span. But when we're experiencing $60,000 savings, then I think that would be a smart spend, especially if we don't have the money right now to do it. But that's a whole nother conversation that, you know, we need to get to. But I just want you to have that in your mind, because I want to get bids, hard bids out, and bring that back to you sooner than later, and get that process going. Like I said, it's been on my mind for a long time, especially with my electrical background. We've done what we could over time, but I think it's time that we get serious about it. We have the ability to look at stuff like that now. But I'd like to have a.
Is that something you could do this summer? Or is that like a?
Physically, yes. Financially, I think we could.
Even if we
figure it out.
financed it, you know, somehow,
Yeah.
like you said.
Yeah. Short answer is yes. It's not as easy as some of the other projects. I mean, we're talking a $600,000 project. So it takes a little bit more, but yes, we could.
I heard that during the debates, there was a lot of interest in LED lights.
Oh, it's huge. The savings is huge, and I think we need to capitalize on that.
You know, this is a little far out there, but the infrastructure bill that's coming along has some big number in it for schools. I don't remember what it is. You're not inclined to wait for that to come.
That I kind of lean on Tim for stuff like that. I don't know how
Did they decide
all of that stuff ties in, and how, you know, how the different funding has to be used appropriately. You know, Tim's really the expert on that. It'd be great.
Did they decide they could bypass the filibuster on that bill?
Not that I know of. No, it's not passed, it's not.
I mean, I know it's not passed, but I didn't know if, you know, sometimes they say we only need to be able to be 50-50.
Yeah. And even then, you know, when they say they have a big number for schools, that's exactly what you're saying, is what's that gonna be for, and how is it gonna be allocated?
And there's a lot of differences between LED lights. You can go, you know, I have some numbers on a real quick, down and dirty, quick fix, where it's using the same exact fixtures, putting in LED tubes, bypassing the ballast, and that drives the cost down about 50%. They're not as efficient, so you don't see the paybacks. And also, I'm very concerned when you start looking at the photometrics, and I'm sorry if I'm gonna bore you a little bit here, but, you know, certain fixtures are designed to work with certain light outputs, whether it be incandescent or fluorescent or LED. They're all different. And when you start trying to retrofit too much, you can run into some pretty undesirable outcomes. Just overall light coverage is one. Two, you know, in our elementary schools, we have a lot of plastic lenses that are yellow, to be quite honest. So that's going to change the output of those LEDs. And the biggest complaint that I've heard when I've talked to other districts that have went through LED lighting upgrades is trying to get the right color of bulb, so you have from a soft white to a bright blue, you know, and everywhere in between. To try and get that correct, and when you're looking at putting LED light fixtures in on the existing wiring, so basically a fixture for a fixture, even though those lights are rated almost the same, again, LED light works a little differently than fluorescent or incandescent. So the brightness and the color are are the highest concerns that both vendors and my peers in other districts have got when they've looked at these.
Does the ballast affect the color? I hear people talking about the ballast on their place all the time. Do you have to bypass it when you put it in? What's it do? It boost the power or something?
So basically a ballast for a fluorescent light, you have a sine wave, and it takes off the highest 2 or 5% of that sine wave, which is the most efficient power. It uses that and it dumps the rest of it back on the neutral, so it's not being used. So that's a lot of where fluorescents get their efficiencies from. But in LED, they have what they call as a driver, kind of the same theory in layman's terms as a ballast, but not. But if you were to put LED tubes in a fluorescent light fixture, you bypass the ballast, put the new tubes in, and each tube has the driver inside of it.
Do they use a lot less amps? That's the whole...
Yeah. Yep.
So you can use the same wires, it's just...
Correct. Yep. So if we go with the fixture model, not only do we have the ability to select the right housing that those LEDs are going to be in to optimally spread the light out, but the fixtures also have the ability to change the color temperature and the brightness. That's important in a couple ways, as far as when you look at, and I don't know the acronyms again, you know, when you go into most of our special ed areas, you see blue covers on the lights to make it a softer light so that it's not so intense. And I don't know the whole behavioral side of that, and I don't know if maybe he wants to comment on that or if it's relevant right now, but you know, so it'll give us the ability to adjust that as the students' needs changes, but also give us the ability to get that right color temperature as well.
And how long did you say it was going to last? 35 years?
That they're rated for 70,000 hours. The average fixture in our buildings is roughly on 1,900 hours a year. So they're ballpark fixtures,
So
obviously.
what was your division there?
30.
Something.
70,000 divided by 2,000.
Yeah, so roughly 35.
Okay.
I think 36 and something or whatever, but.
Hate to cheap out on something that's going to last 35 years, especially if you get the wrong color light bulbs. This way you can fix it.
Well, that, and then when you look at the life expectancy of the cheap model that I have priced out, you know, they're more in that 15 to 20 year life range. So right off the get-go, the life expectancy is much greater. Not to mention the additional benefits of making sure that light dispersion, color temperature, and brightness is much more easily maneuverable.
I've been in the elementary classrooms and thought the lighting was depressing.
They are.
It's just not cheery, like
Absolutely. And you could,
Jake, if I could kind of maybe just offer a redirect, and get to go higher level on the plan, or maybe,
Yeah.
let's go ahead and go do that.
yep, sorry. So, yeah, getting back to the plan, my intent with the list that I put on here is, there is a large dollar amount that in the next 10 years, we're gonna have to find a solution for. And I don't know how we do it. Alls I know is that if you look at my normal budget, it's not gonna make it.
What's your normal capital improvement budget each year, roughly?
200,000, sometimes it goes up to 300,000, I think was the highest I've had in the 5 years now.
Yeah, and again, and maybe now is kind of a segue into the funding of Fund 46. But what happens when we talk about the revenue limit formula, when we have additional money put into the revenue limit, that gives us opportunities to put money towards remodeling. And so Jake has a separate budget for just reactionary maintenance. So when something breaks today, he can go down, and whether that's a water heater, or a pipe, or a locker, he has monies available to do that. And he probably spends something in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $15,000 in any given month strictly on maintenance that he may or may not know is going to happen tomorrow. Just as a refresher, we've got this Fund 46 set up. And Fund 46 is a segregated account that the board has approved and authorized. DPI has a requirement that establishment of the fund, of the trust, was set up by the board and approved by the board. And there's a 5-year waiting period before we can access any money that was put into the trust. The DPI requires that we submit approved minutes from those meetings where that trust was established, and that the board approve this 10-year capital improvement plan. So the window of time is supposed to be a time frame of 10 years. And then on top of it, our 5-year waiting period is over on July 1. Any expenditure that comes out of the trust, Fund 46, has to be an item that is in Jake's identified plan. And as Jake has talked about, you don't know from 1 year to the next which item is going to bubble to the top, and whether or not the items that he's got on his plan today are the items that are going to be absolutely need to be addressed next school year. So my suggestion would be that certainly prior to July, we would have an approved maintenance plan. And each and every year prior to July, Jake include all those items. And in an emergency, if something would happen, before we can pull money out of the trust for an identified item, we'd have to amend the plan, and it'd have to be approved by the board. And I'd even recommend that as we make expenditures from the trust, that would be in a motion as an item that would be bid out and approved by the board, and we can show that. So, and from the district standpoint, so we have to provide our auditors a summary of the plan if they should ask, and a summary of the minutes should they ask. Items that we can include are purchases of land, building, improvements, equipment, machinery, and IT infrastructure. So it's pretty broad. What's important to note that, I talked in previous meetings about how the year is shaping up. We get aid on when we put money into the trust, not when we take it out. And DPI allows us to make the final transfer into the trust within 30 days of the end of the school year. So we have the ability to really get, sooner is better than later, I think. And as soon as we know, because I just don't like extending transactions after June 30th. But to know in June, to come forward and say the school year is going to end such and such, and we can put monies towards Fund 46 and claim aid on it next year. So we can control the expenditure. DPI does not recommend that as we use Fund 46, we begin encumbering encumbrances against the trust when the money isn't there yet. So as an example, let's use the track. If Jake is going to start the track on July 1, we don't start the track on June 1st and then accumulate all these bills, and we want to do it succinctly so that we're starting new projects in Fund 46 on July 1st, and he's got then the whole school year to complete those projects, and then we could subsequently have put the money in to get aided on in June. So right now, we have just over 300,000. I think there's something like $320,000 in Fund 46 that will be available. And hopefully after our discussions on a couple other items on the board, I'll have some sense of what our priorities are, and do we sweep remaining funds into Fund 46 to help fund these future projects. It is going to be highly unlikely to think that, we are in a COVID year, and I've talked about that, and we have federal funds that we are receiving that we are using, like as an example, gear funding. Any cleaning chemical or supply or PPE that we could divert to gear, we did that. Jake's supply budget is underspent because we use federal dollars. We're doing that everywhere we can. So we have this 1 or 2 year opportunity to be able to sweep funds into Fund 46. That's going to dry up. And to think that we're going to pull off a $600,000 project, it might be a one-time deal. I don't foresee that as a way for us to likely operate in the future after our federal funding and stimulus money is gone. That long-term, those need to be addressed. It's a very convenient way for us to really work at controlling our levy if we can, and to maximize our state aid.
What are our options for the officers, for like the counselor? Can we just get ourselves a couple more trailers, plunk one at each elementary school and put them in there? We get rid of that trailer? Do we sell that?
We got rid of it, and yeah, it's gone.
Get a smaller one? Like a broom closet size one?
I'd rather not.
So that's really the funding piece of it. If Jake has further items he wants to discuss.
You just mentioned the Windows thing, because at least the lights, that feels like it could have an academic benefit and a cost-saving benefit.
Yep.
But what's the pitch on the windows?
So if you look at our buildings, you'll see that basically all the windows are of the same vintage style, everything. Back even prior to Tim, Joe Schrader had bought, I think, like a semi-load of these windows. They ripped out all the old windows and just started slapping these things in. They're all wood frame. They're back to the best I could tell was the mid to late 80s they installed them. A number of them are either inoperable or have rotted out through the years. We've spot replaced a few of them. Also, when you look at the surrounding, what they did is they had big windows and they put small windows in them. So they framed in around there, and some of those are starting to show some major concern as far as integrity of that material. So between them just not working And when we go to get parts for them, they're obsolete. So there's a lot of windows that just don't work, period, because we don't have the parts to put back in them, and we're trying to make the windows that we need to work.
Would we open them now that we have air conditioning?
Well, this year, yeah, we told them to open all the windows because of the fresh air for COVID.
You know, I think at the time you have to realize that they were a commercial, very high-quality wood window. And, I would imagine the windows that they replaced were single pane. And, if you think about, the oil embargo and where we were at, it was a very prudent thing to do. But again, looking at that life cycle cost, I mean, those windows have way exceeded their serviceable life. And we just have a whole district full.
So you're not talking about something cool, like ripping out half the wall of each of those elementary rooms and making it like all windows, sun's shining right in there. You're talking about replacing the area.
I would like to put bigger windows in there, yeah.
That's what we had, it was all windows, and then they tipped, the bottom halves tipped in. And they were great.
Yep. So yeah, I would like to put
I mean,
bigger
so your budget there, is that making the windows bigger, or is that replacing with new windows?
This is replacing the window one for one with a aluminum frame window. Knowing that that's probably the top-notch price. As we get some of the other priorities taken off and we get more serious about bidding that out, I hope to find some alternative solutions where we can get bigger windows. Maybe not as fancy of a window, but as good a quality of a window, and trade that off. I have a few different numbers for windows this size, windows bigger. It's kind of a educated guess in there, but then you gotta keep in mind that every year we wait on these things, the average construction cost is about 4%. Real specific, when we look at the high school roof, I think Tim was around that $4 a square foot, maybe $4.50. And right now, we're looking at pricing of 10, maybe $10.50 a square foot. And that's just from the last section he did was in 2014, 2015. So just in 7 years, it's gone up considerably. So, yeah, these numbers are a good guesstimation. But likewise with the CISA report, by the time we got to see those come to fruition, the numbers were much outdated. So, I don't want to get too hung up on that unless we're really, like with LEDs, those are my top priority, so I want to get very granular with those. When you look at other items, it's more of budgetary.
I don't remember how, so we have 3 options. 1, you close the schools and build a new one, that's expensive. I personally am not dying to do that. 2, we fix these buildings very slowly, partly with Fund 46 and partly with your budget. 3, we pass some sort of operating referendum. Or what would that be? If it's only, how many years can you go out? Can you get a 30-year loan? Could we have like a 0.25, 25-cent tax increase over 30 years to get $6 million at 0% interest or whatever we get these days? Or is that not allowed?
Jamie, are you asking about
I'm
whether
asking,
you want a non-recurring referendum or general obligation bonds for improvements?
I don't know which one. I'm asking if you have non-recurring and you got this $6 million over, we got the money now and paid for it over 20 years or something.
I'd have to review the statutes, but I don't recall anybody going non-recurring out over 5 years. And, obligation bonds, certainly not unheard of going out 20, for capital improvement.
What's the difference between an obligation bond?
Well, I mean,
and-
they're both bonds, but one is, look at the tax impact of, let's say you got $5 million, we know that that's gonna be about 85 85 cents for every $1 million we go out on a non-recurring.
Yeah, but you would do that,
Where general
5 million, you
obligation
might do
bonds,
1 million per year.
Yep.
So it'd be 85 cents a year.
Over 20 years.
No,
No.
for the 5 years.
Oh, but if, so I want to go over more, so it's cheaper. We're going to use these buildings for 30 more years.
Yeah, that would be a capital improvement question.
I just, interest is dirt cheap right now.
So anyway, let's,
Do you want to hear about bathrooms?
no, I don't know, how much time were you planning on spending on this?
I could talk as long as you want, but I guess you tell me.
Speaking of bathrooms, I can't let you talk forever without going to the bathroom. But,
I think the point where, I was trying to hit on, and, Tim had kind of mentioned is, for the next 2 years, we may have some opportunity to take some big bites off of this. After that, it's pretty grim at this point. Now,
Yeah.
2 years, where were we 2 years ago? Lots can change. But we need to start having some serious conversation, along the lines that JD was talking about where we want to be as a district and how we want to get there. Because my budget is not going to support any option, even status quo. So I think that's the point.
Right.
Do we have to talk about it all tonight? I don't think so, but, if we want to have a small workshop just on facilities or however you want to do it, I can talk for a long time, but you guys can tell me how much you want. What I am asking is at the next board meeting to approve just the 10-year capital improvement document.
That's that one that we just looked at.
Yep, so that we can submit that to our Fund 46 and be in compliance with that. So come the end of June, we can do what we want and operate.
yeah, I don't see a problem with doing that.
And remember, any expenditure out of that fund is coming back to you anyways. Anything that we want to amend on that sheet comes back to you anyways. So it's not like you're just signing off and here you go, Jake, have fun for 10 years. It still falls in the same normal operations. It's just technicality that we have to file this with the state.
Okay. Okay, I think we are, if people want to take a little break here before we move on to the rest of the items.
Sorry.
Seems how there's more than one or two. Let's just take a 5-minute break.
It won't be quick, right?
My computer died.
Yeah.
Wait, did you just get it back?
Huh?
Oh,
I got it back, but the battery died,
got it.
so now it seems appropriate.
I lasted longer than Energized battery.
Yeah, you're like the Energizer bunny, you keep going and going.
I didn't know if the camera was on. I so badly wanted to go keep her, but I didn't.
Should have worn a pink shirt.
No, I just did it in a cleaner place, rewrote it again.
What's that? How's it going?
He fell 3 times this week. And the third time was Sunday, and I was in the garage visiting with Dennis. And he was in the bathroom, and somehow must have slipped or lost his balance. And he took Coumadin for years, and he's been off it, but his like paper.
Yes, my dad's too.
So I go in and I look down the hall and the bathroom door's kind of ajar, and he said, "I need your help." And I look on the floor and he just bleeds like a star. It's about 6 by 4 with the skin. Oh my God. And then just trying to, today trying to get that dressing changed, and I got one of those greasy mushy things that you lay over the top of it. And of course, when I'm trying to pull, he's screaming at me because it hurts. And, oh, brother. And then the top fell off and he didn't see it. Oh, no. And it was like, are you effing kidding me? And so then, of course, every time something happens, don't tell the kids. So Jane decided we needed to have a Zoom meeting yesterday, and Julie, I can't participate. They know. And they're, I mean, I'm doing the day-to-day. They need to decide what's going on. Well, trying to find out and I don't want to back the nursing. And so last night I was sitting on the couch and my chest hurt. I'm just so full of anxiety. And you know, when he thinks Dennis can come over and pick him up.
No, I'm
And of course, Dennis Russell's right over him. And I told the kids, I said, this can't happen anymore. Dennis is 70 something. He doesn't weigh 100 pounds soaking wet. He can't be picking up weight in his dead weight. He can't help with his legs. Oh Jesus, it's been just really bad.
Listening session.
So I don't know what we're gonna do with that.
The listening session, yeah.
Katie got a condo in Greenfield. And she sent me a guy to walk through. She sent me a thing. It's very nice. A nice area.
Yes.
And Dad said, oh, what is she just jumping into that? I said, because first of all, Dad, finding a place to decent for you to rent.
Like just he needs to get his feet wet and get used to everything, you think? Grow into it and stuff, or?
And keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything to her. Well, of course, she's always prepped for it. And of course, he made a big fuss about how great it was, and he can't wait to get down there. And I thought, well, then somebody's going to have to drive up here and get him and drive him down, because I sure as hell am shaking. So she's excited about it. She posts it on the 17th of May. And so
At least she gives
she's
an
got to
answer.
get her moving
I may not like the
company
answer, but at least she's
Yeah, she's
she's given one of the.
19 boxes that I have in the basement, and that's for China and Crystal and her everyday dishes. And
Did they bring up mental health stuff though?
there's 19 boxes.
Did they bring up one mental
Danny
health?
went down to get Jeff's
That
plate.
every time I talk
Danny
about
and
this
Andy
thing,
went to
it's
get
been
Jeff's
brought up.
play school stuff. He still got, Mom never got rid of the house and the school. And
She
the
still
McDonald's
uses
and the
her
gas station.
She's 40 now.
So
Really? Okay.
they ran down on Friday. Betsy, Molly had an appointment. Betsy had to get a shot, so she was at
And
on Friday.
she had
She
it,
drops the boys off
and it was
oh my
after
God,
she was
they go down there
she
and
was still
haul it
staunchly
all up to the kitchen floor.
And I was talking with another
And-
state senator from out south. He's like, oh,
Andy came up and
one
he
way I
goes,
see her getting.
my goodness, what's all that stuff in the storeroom down there with dishes and fragile written on the side? I said, well, that would be a kid.
We'll go back over it, eh?
Might as well. You
It was just
know,
stuff she didn't want to put in storage. And I said,
Told Mike for our last meeting, we're getting overtime.
You do get it goes over 2 hours.
We're over 2 hours.
You're going out with a bang, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we will go back
Yeah, let's.
to item H, review of the 2020-21 budget status to include Fund 38 and Fund 73.
Okay. So as we're winding out the year, we, last Friday was the deadline for submitting requisitions for, like, things like supply purchases and major items that classroom teachers will need to finish out the school year. The incidental items such as like field trips and those kinds of things will still be going on. But we're just, and then, you know, as you can imagine, there's always the Johnny-come-latelys that miss the Friday deadline, and we're trying to allow them this week to try to finish things up. So I don't have a direct number, but I do know that within, I've mentioned this before, within this salary budget, We have in excess of $150,000 that is available in the salary budget, as well as the capital equipment budget that was not expended this year because we either didn't, we diverted federal money, or we had positions that we did not fill. So, though that money, that minimum is gonna be available. And over the next couple of weeks, I'd like to go ahead and try to get dial that number as closely as I can. And two options are, and I guess I'll take them one at a time, would be the Fund 38, our prior service debt. And I've included a copy of the budget book, and I also included a memo. And let's just take a look at opening up the memo. And essentially, it's really very close sequential. This time of the year, Fund 38 debt is underneath the revenue limit formula. So in the fall, when we set the levy, it includes within Fund 10, a portion of Fund 10 monies used to pay off this prior service debt. And we can use monies yet from this year, unexpended monies, and we can retire debt, and we can save on interest. And my recommendation would be that if the board chooses to do that, that would be one vehicle that we could use in addition to Fund 46 to make sure that we've maximized everything out of the general fund and maximized state aid. And but what we have to do is, unlike other types of, when you hear districts defeasing debt or controlling their mill rate by prepaying down debt, with Fund 38, and I'm certainly no expert, I've just talked to folks in DPI and our, as well as with PMA and our bond attorney, that we have to make that payment prior to the end of the school year. There is no allowance for any kind of a carryover or doing any escrow of Fund 38 debt. So if they're suggesting that our bond counsel is recommending that we bring a number to the board, that number gets approved by the board. There is a 30-day notice of calling that debt, and then we go ahead and make the appropriate transfers. And DPI would really like to see us have that occur prior to June, but it has to absolutely occur before June 30th. So the benefit of that is it frees up some future obligation, and depending about how much we peel off, one way to do it would be to, to save the most amount of interest, would take the final payment amount and go ahead and prepay that debt first. So I think we have 3 years remaining in the prior debt schedule. We paid the roughly $330,000 off first for the third year, and any other funds that we could start freeing up the second year. And what that would do then is the years when we might be falling off the cliff in terms of the revenue limit formula would be the years that we could free up that Fund 38 debt and use it in the general fund. So that's one option.
So Tim, if we fall off the cliff, so to speak, after 2 years here, because we're gonna get CARES money and that's gonna carry us for 2 years, sort of. So are you saying you'd have to get rid of 2 years of that obligation? So
I'm suggesting, Andy, what we could do, we've already paid off, so if we open up the book from the page from the budget book, I didn't update this, we've paid the 2021 portion of that debt. And now you can see the balance. And, we could go look at that 23-24 year and say, okay, we're gonna designate, approximately $300,000. And then I'd work with bond counsel and they'd make the appropriate calls to those bondholders that we're gonna prepay. Because now the debt's callable.
So there is no prepayment penalty?
Not now that it's callable, no.
Okay.
And depending upon how deep we wanted to get into paying that off, we could say, okay, this year we're not gonna do Fund 46, we're gonna do Fund 38. Or the board could say, no, we've got CARES Act coming in, maybe, you know, whatever your pleasure is, or I could try to structure it such, but I mean, we have alternatives. And one is, I believe the interest rate on this is about 3.5%, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. No, it says 5.25. Is that right? I thought it was at 3.
Yeah, 5 point. Yeah.
So that's one option.
So on 146, we could put money in May. Can we take it right back out in July?
Yes.
So this is, so we're saying LED lighting, you'd save 10% versus paying 5% here. I mean, that's one way of looking at it, right?
Yeah, there are trade-offs with everything, yeah.
But the reason to do this would be so you didn't have that obligation in 2 years.
Or sooner, I mean, you know, depending on how much we wanted to put, maybe there's a balance. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give the board options. And one is Fund 46, the next is Fund 38, this prior service debt, prepaying that. And then the final one would be the Fund 73. So I can touch on that if the board has any other questions. And I guess the way I look at it is we know our projections of enrollment, the rate of decline, we hope, is going to decrease. And when the rate of decline decreases under the revenue limit formula, our exemption, the one-time exemption money we get because of that decline, drops off. And all of this is so premature because if we knew where the biennial budget was going, we would also know how that's going to impact, but we don't have that information right now. So if we don't get new money under the revenue limit format, it would be prudent to pay off this debt.
So are you looking for some direction here from the board tonight to what amount we would?
I would entertain, I think, Andy, looking at, I think it'd be prudent to do at least 1 year, the final year, and that would be the most significant, then to look at year 2. But we know that we've got a little discussion about how we're developing the budget going forward tonight also. That next year doesn't look so bad right now, as far as we can tell. So I think we could handle the Fund 38 next year. In future years, it'll be, we're taking from the general fund.
Okay. So I think I hear what you're saying it'd be good to do 1 year for sure and possibly 2.
If we can pool that much money. But the trade-off is you will not have money in Fund 46, or as much money.
Yep.
Is Fund 46 in the budget book? Does it say that in there somewhere? Because it's not technically in fund balance, is it, even though it'd be reserved?
It's in a segregated trust on its own.
So is it listed in the budget book though?
I don't recall if I put it in this last year. I've given you reports on it.
I remember talking about it at lots of meetings, I just curious.
I might have missed it this year.
I didn't check, so I have no idea. I was just curious.
Okay, so any questions on, and I think, Andy, what I'll do is I'll have a recommendation, because what I want to bring back to the board is a motion to approve a level, and I don't, I can give you the pros and cons at the meeting of do we want 1 year, 1.5 year, do we want to do 2 years? I can give you that to the board.
Yeah.
But at that meeting, I would like in 2 weeks, to have a resolution saying we are going to authorize this much money or no money.
Yeah.
So I can get the process rolling so that we can get it all covered by June 30th.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right, then the other item I wanted to talk a little bit about, and it works in our favor this year.
Andy, or I mean, can you want to let Dave have a 1 minute since he really likes that
Okay.
idea?
You can talk on that for 1 minute, Dave.
Thank you. Tim,
Yep.
if we pay off 3 years, now at the last meeting, you said you were gonna have 400,000 basically left over in this budget. At last, last week.
And Dave, I'm always going to present conservative figures.
So it could be more. Okay. We put 828,000 in the fund balance, correct? Last year.
Yep.
Okay. So if we pay off all 3 years, that costs us basically $870,000. If we take the money out of the fund balance to make it 870, what we've done is save $43,000 in interest, and we freed up $305,000 for next year's budget and every budget thereafter.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
my caution, Dave, would be to really look at where we are with the aid formula and the levy, and look at the combination.
but if we use some of our fund balance that we put in last year, we'll get payback in tax relief, correct?
Yeah.
And our budget, our tax levy will go down.
Yep.
Yeah. And we freed up $305,000.
Do we still get
When
aided
you
on
just
it?
said last time that we were gonna be short about 280,000 in next year's budget. See, I pay attention.
So there, I would want an opportunity to look at more than a single year's impact on the levy and the aid formula. In the years that, because we're a low spending district, in the years where they don't add to the aid formula, the revenue limit formula, we're right at the border between secondary aid and tertiary aid. And then when we get additional monies into the low revenue limit formula, we bounce up into the tertiary aided portion if we spend all of our budget. In the years that we don't get aid onto the formula and we start dropping enrollment, we end up being, and again, it's all relative to the other 432 school districts. If our spending is relatively less, we end up in the secondary aid portion. In the years that we're in the secondary aid portion is the years that we want to be spending in fund balance, because we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck onto the levy. And if we manage that, we'd have to manage it over time. That would be the long-term best way. Rather than, because of what we're doing now, we're going to go down in the levy next year. And we would drop further. But the following year, because it's not sustainable, then it's going to go up. The other option is to be managing that levy for whatever future desires the board has. And that would be one reason why I would caution it. But it's an approach. It's absolutely an approach.
So I'm asking that when you give us options in 2 weeks, that's included.
Okay? Let's continue on.
Okay.
Thank you, Andy, for recognizing me.
Okay.
This one's just going to be real short. So I got in here the actuary report for our most recent Fund 73 OPEB trust report. And in the past, we have used this as a pay-as-you-go to pay our liability for post-employment benefits. And in the report, it talks about changes that we've made to the plan with, this portion of our Fund 73 trust is no longer accessible to anybody but 3 grandfathered employees, I being one of them. And as of this year, our ADC, so that's an actuarially determined contribution, is at $170,000. Going forward, according to the plan, based on some sensitivity analysis with interest rates, that our obligation looks like the plan is, I'm going to say, fully funded. The contributions in and out of the plan are going to be fairly insignificant, depending on when the three of us decide to access the plan. So, because I'm retirement age, every year that I don't retire, that liability is going down because I'm working. So I think what I wanted the board to know, this was a defined benefit. The other half of our plan, the HRA, is that defined contribution. So our obligations in future years in Fund 73 for this portion are really dropping off to the point that next year we're freeing up money in the general fund because this is fully funded now as of this year.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep. So that's it for that item, unless anybody has any more questions. And we'll move on to item I. Budget development.
Okay, this is a document that we've used in the past as we're developing next year's budget, and I'll be real brief with it. And again, it's in its very most preliminary stages, and what I hope to do by the April meeting is have several of the items tuned in a little bit tighter. But I've talked to you already about the revenue limit formula, and I believe I remember a number of about 250,000 was the reduction. We had a one-time open enrollment adjustment that was part of our revenue limit this year that is falling off, that I failed to include in the number. So that number, our reduction is 273,000. And then we have a reduction in enrollment, so our per pupil categorical aid amount is going down. So the total general fund money reduction is going to be $334,000 approximately. And again, that's just based on an enrollment number that's a guess and by gosh at this point. And that's assuming no new money under the revenue limit formula in the governor's budget. Then I'm showing additions, and I'm referencing CPI, and the reason I'm referencing CPI is the Consumer Price Index. And across the state of Wisconsin, it talks about union agreements that come due on July 1 of this year. They're required to use a CPI. We're not required to use CPI, but it's just a good gauge. So I'm saying that an administrative increase based on CPI would be that. The next item, I'm probably going to ask for approval in, I think Julie, we talked about today, maybe waiting off until May, but to allow our teaching staff to go on the current schedule without adding to the schedule and allowing everybody to take a step increase would be $265,000 increase. Increasing support staff with CPI is $36,000. I already talked to you about the health insurance. It's a $152,000 increase. Transportation has a 3% built in. I'm fairly confident that Jake's utility budget is in pretty good shape. We had a little bit extra in this budget because of having a couple additional buildings at the start of the school year. So I think we're okay there. We're talking about adding one FTE, and I believe that's a school site position. And then we've got reductions, and based on the retirements that I know of to date, I'm just estimating the difference in salary for a senior teacher, that particular senior teacher, and a starting teacher. Now, I don't know what contract offers have been made so far already this year and whether that's going to hold true, but that's my budget estimate. We've just begun to look at staffing in detail, And there may be some additional savings with FTE reductions that I'll have ready for you at the April meeting. I've asked the high school to look at teaching overloads, and they're currently doing that. I talked to you about the capital equipment budget. I would like just to say, okay, to balance that budget, we're gonna wipe that out, all but just a little bit. I guess I am taking a little bit out of Jake's utility budget. Because of enrollment, we've had a $32,000 reduction in the building budgets. I've already talked to you about the OPEB liability. In terms of general fund support of professional development, I'm suggesting that we cut that because we, at this moment, with the additional Title II and some of our CARES money, we could offset that expense. Also moving the after-school program like we did this year off of to CARES 2. I want us to consider looking at the way we do our remodeling and consider using that Fund 46 in future years as a sweep account and take it out of the budget and say we're going to fund that remodeling out of Fund 46 sweep. And that could be, this year Jake has $300,000 budgeted there. Some portion of that could be used to help balance the budget. I've also asked Mark Kautza, he talked a little bit today about the telephone and the hosted service and the savings we're going to incur by that $50,000 expenditure. That's going to reduce his budget by approximately $40,000. So I want him to look at his. We are also using the CARES money to support his technology initiatives. And Mark's budget is in excess of $400,000. So I would expect that we, at least in the short term, we could balance it there. So right now, as this draft document sits, you can see we've added a significant portion, yet we've got a little bit to go.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. All right, we can go on to action items.
I move the board approve the quote from Mid-North Epoxy Floor of $18,500 for epoxy floor covering in the high school choir room.
Second. Any discussion? A roll call?
Alzer,
Yes.
Bolduc,
Yes.
Gagnon,
Yes.
Newfeld,
Yes.
Schrader,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes. Okay, and we'll go on to the report of employee resignations.
I move the board approve the following resignations effective at the end of the school year. Shantice Tarpey, Reading Resource Specialist, and Jason Leist, 8th grade ELA teacher, and the retirements of Mary Velo, Speech and Language Pathologist, and Linda Wavago, Food Service at North Elementary, effective at the end of the school year.
Second.
Okay, we'd just like to thank them for their service. Some has been long and some not so long, but we'd like to thank them for their contribution to the district. And any other comments or questions? And all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and we'll go on to confirm the next meeting will be Tuesday, May 11th, 6 p.m. here. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to say thank you to Mike for your years of service and Jeannie for her years of service. It's been a long time, and Wayne for your years.
A month.
Okay, come on.
Maybe they felt like years.
Thanks. Food for the eagle.
No, I meant for you.
Yeah, we're sending you off on a big, longer than normal meeting here, so.
Yeah. We'll get overtime then, don't we?
You get overtime, absolutely. Okay, and with that?
If I may,
Yes.
I've been doing this for 12 years now. I've had the opportunity to work with some wonderful people in this board, and quite frankly, at times, work with some real jackasses. And they know who they are. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to relocate out there. And I'm going to be part of this because I believe in education. And I also believe I'm operated by a philosophy that I don't owe anything to anyone for being here, but I answer to everyone. And I appreciate the time that I've been here. I appreciate the people that I've worked with. I think over the years, I've worked with some very wonderful administrative staff. And I think right now is probably one of the best ones we've had. And if anybody wants to argue with me on that point, I'll meet you outside. These people work day in and day out to operate this district as best as possible. They are dedicated to their jobs. They're trying to provide the best education possible to the kids, and that should be the focus. And if anybody tries to take the focus away from the fact that this is an educational facility and tries to turn it into something else, I pity them. I thank you all for your time. I thank you all for being my friend over the years. That ain't gonna change. And I'm gonna miss this. But like I said, I ain't going anywhere, and don't let the future stare you down either, because I might be back. You never know.
You can always public comment, Mike, every meeting at the beginning.
Well, no. Because I will take my 5 minutes and you get sick of hearing from me, because I'm going to speak when it's necessary.
Okay, thank you, Mike. That was well said. And Wayne?
I would just like to say that I've only been on this for about 8 months. I feel like I've been part of a team. I feel like we work well together. Again, I got on the board because I'm still actively teaching, still working with children, and I feel like I have something to offer to the board, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to do that. And kind of echo what Mike said, you're going to see me around because I still feel that I have something to offer. And thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Well said.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
I'll second it.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.